had asked about it. I didn't. Uh, I see a little. I see a little recording button going, so maybe it's already recording.
Yeah, my
Um,
bad. I just started recording.
oh, okay, okay, no worries. All right, thanks. Alrighty. So continuing on. And then so there are all these facets of who I am, but oh, and then I also happen to be if PowerPoint works, a Marine Corps veteran. Right. And so I present this information in a joking manner to sort of intentionally downplaying that I was in the Marine Corps, not because I'm not proud of it, but because it is only one part of who makes me. And I want to keep that sort of keep that mindset while we move through this together to keep in perspective that every student, whether they're a student veteran or not, is going to be a multifaceted individual. And if they are a veteran, it's only one part of who they are. Which brings us to the first challenge that I want to introduce to you all, which is assumed homogeneity. And so this is actually one of the main reasons that student veterans are reluctant to claim that they are a veteran unless it's directly brought out of them. They won't volunteer that information because there is an overwhelming majority of impressions that are put upon them and excuse me, sorry about that, that are they assume who they are based on the fact that they are a veteran. And so this is a little pie chart I whipped up from an article published by Task and Purpose, illustrating what civilian peers often have the impression or the assumptions that all veterans are. I obviously a veteran, but some things that may but may not apply are that they have a disability, that they might have PTS, they might have TBI, some other things that might apply but might not are that they're very politically right leaning, which can be off putting, especially if you are not politically right leaning, for folks to just assume that you are. Um, and then some other things that can be detrimental to building relationships is that there's an assumption that the veteran might probably supports war, which I've never met a veteran that supports war in itself. And another assumption that is reported is that civilian peers, student peers will often think that their veteran peers come from poor backgrounds, and the only reason that they joined the military is because they didn't have any other choices, which is not the case. And so I wanted to put this up here just to kind of give you an idea of why assumed homogeneity can be very painful for some veterans, and why you might have a situation where a student veteran doesn't want to claim that they're a veteran immediately. To contrast that, this is some anecdotal evidence of some of the facets that make up the student veteran population here at NAU based on the students that I've had come through the freshman seminar course. Obviously, there is they are veterans, and that means a lot to them. And some of them do have disabilities, some have PTS, and some have TBI. But those things are very rare in the majority. And when you look at the whole population, the things that are more common are being passionate about something. You have I've had several students who continued on after their service, and while they are a student, they're a firefighter or a law enforcement officer. They're still contributing back to their community. I've had some students that are, when you ask them, what are you, what makes you who you are, one of the first things they say is that they are a spouse or that they are a parent. They're very proud of that, right? And these are things that any person from any population can be very proud of. Other things that I've seen come up are that I've had a student who was a social media influencer who looked to try to increase wilderness engagement activities using Instagram and YouTube. I had a student who was really focusing on conservationism and was participating in a group here on campus to work on that. I've had a student who has published papers in, actually, I've had two students who have published papers in genetics work, looking at different facets of that. And so there is this really broad spectrum of different aspects that actually contribute to the student veteran population. And so keeping in mind that these student veterans are very diverse, right? That means also that their needs and their challenges are going to be very unique to them because they're a unique individual. And some of you might be thinking, if I had a student who had any challenges, I would want to try to help them and give that unique support that they need to the best of my ability. But there's very rarely does a student veteran come to their classroom and voice their issues. And why is that? Well, a big part of the reason brings us to the next most common challenge that student veterans face, which is a change in structure. Now, universities do their best effort to provide a breadth of resources to support all of their students in whatever challenges they have. With that, it creates a structure that is incredibly more complex, especially when compared to a military structure. So to try to put this into perspective, I wanted to give you a little cartoon diagram. This is sort of the typical military structure. You have an individual, let's say it's me, let's say it's you, and you are part of a team. And the team is usually 4 to 6 people, depending on what your job is. And in that team, you know, without a doubt, what your job, your role, your purpose in that team is. Then you take a team and you put a few teams together and you get a squad, and you know what your team's job in that squad is. You put a couple of squads together, you get a platoon, a couple of platoons together, and a company. And the hierarchy continues on past this. You put companies together, you get a battalion, so forth. But the pattern stays the same of it being sequentially smaller building blocks that are all built off of the individuals working together in small units. And what does this do for the individual? Well, this gives the person, in this case the military service member, a sense of purpose. They know what their job is. It also gives them a social support network. If you have a challenge arise while you're in the military, your first point of contact is going to be your team leader, where you go to the person in charge of your team and you tell them, like, hey, I'm having a hard time with this. And if the team leader can't fix it, they'll bring it to the squad leader. If the squad leader can't, they'll bring it to the platoon leader. And this can continue on, so forth. And you can eventually, if the need is there, mobilize hundreds of individuals, all with the purpose to support that one single individual to continue making the unit successful. All right. So it's really a linear structure that we have in the military. If we compare that to the typical academic freshman structure, right? This upcoming fall semester, there's a Bio 181 course, and this is, I didn't pick this one because I had most of them have this. The class capacity is 240 students. So you can see how already we're starting off with this individual being dropped into a classroom, and there is no lower level structure than that initially. If the teacher or professor implements one, that's their own prerogative, but it's not required by any measure. And so you can already see that now the student is in this ocean of people, and they might not feel comfortable bringing up any issues, right? They might not feel comfortable seeking support in this environment. In addition to that, something that makes it even more complicated is a Bio 181 or a Bio 181 lecture course has a required lab that goes with it. And so now this individual is in two different settings, supposed to be learning the same thing in different modalities, but from different instructors. There will be a different professor for the Bio 181 lecture than there is for the Bio 181 lab. And in addition to that, the individuals that also make up the rest of the lab may or may not even be in your 181 lecture, right? And so there's a lot of this creates a lot of distance compared to the military structure where an individual is part of a team and that team is part of a squad, and that squad works, lives, and eats and sleeps together, right? They're spending so much time building very intense bonds and relationships that makes it feel like family. And then you come to a university setting where you might feel like just a drop in an ocean, right? And these are only the differences that we've identified from pointing out that this is one of the classes this student's going to be in for their first year, for their first semester. Typically, a freshman's going to be part of another large entry level class, right? Same story where this is now going to be a different instructor, and they're a freshman, so they're probably going to be in a freshman first year seminar course because that is it fills a lot of the requirements. And then they're also probably going to be in another large lecture hall course where they're just another drop, a blur among the crowd. And then we have our general studies, so don't forget, let's throw in a philosophy class in there, right? And so you can already see how before the individual could expect to be able to escalate an issue, and their purpose and their responsibilities were very linear in the military structure. But in the academic structure, that individual's purpose and responsibilities are pulled into a ton of different directions. If you're a full-time student with 15 credits, right, that is at minimum 5 different classes. And so you have this very jarring sensation of being pulled in a bunch of different ways. And then, so you might be thinking, well, at this point, you can follow it on and be linear with it. So maybe that helps the student understand. Well, we can do a little illustration. Okay, so we have biology covering the biology classes. Oh, that makes sense. Okay, so we got a department of biology and they do biology. Cool. Chemistry, Department of Chemistry, Philosophy, Department of Philosophy, FYS, Department of the first year seminar department. Great. Okay, okay. But what about if we try to follow that structure up even further? Well, we immediately see a disconnect because the biology department and the chemistry department are part of the same college. And a typical misunderstanding when you're coming to a university is that college and university is the same thing, but it's not. And so you might be thinking, wait a minute, I thought NAU was the college, but it's made up of several colleges. And so that's another learning curve that this individual has to overcome just to start to be a part of this structure. And then you have down here, okay, Department of Philosophy. Well, philosophy is the study of thinking and consciousness, but that's in the College of Arts and Letters. I thought arts was like music and painting and sculpting and things like that. How does that fit in? And then you have the first year seminar, which falls under the College of Education, but I thought all of this was education, right? And so you can see this is already really jarring when compared to the linear structure of the military. But something we haven't come across yet is if this individual has an issue that is not involved directly in the class, they haven't met any support system yet, right? Wouldn't it be appropriate for the individual to come to their biology professor and say, hey, I don't have somewhere to live? So when you have these questions that this individual might face, like I don't have somewhere to live, I'm sick, I don't know who to go to get better. I'm having troubles paying for all of this. Where do they go? Well, NAU does have a place to help with that, and that is student affairs. But notice the student hasn't met anybody from student affairs yet. And they're supposed to now go and ask a complete stranger, a complete strange department for help with something that they might feel very vulnerable about. And student affairs is fantastic. They have a ton of different services to help. They have the department, the veteran and military services. They have a department for transfer students. They have a ton of different things. And so you might be thinking, oh, okay, I know this idea. I know this structure. You have this and it's a bunch of departments and you put those together. That's a college, right? And so jokes aside, I hope the little bit of chaos here on the screen is a good illustration for how this can be very overwhelming for a student veteran coming to the university out of the military, where they've been used to a very rigid and linear structure for their organization. And in that structure of the military, it was very clear what their purpose was, what their role in the team, what their team's role in the squad and so forth was. But then now when you come to the university, you can feel like a blur among an ocean of faces. So it might be, and what is your role in that class? Your role is to learn, but that is such a conceptual goal that it's hard to feel like it actually sometimes it's a challenge to feel like it is meaningful, and it doesn't feel tangible. And so this kind of creates this challenge and the struggle inside of the student, where they've lost a bunch of friends, they are unsure about their purpose, it can lead to questioning their identity, and then now they're in a different social system that's very different from the military, and you have a deeply alienating, and it can create a deeply alienating environment for that student. And so what can we do to help with that? Well, we can create a sense of teamwork and create a sense of purpose for them. So like we said, in the military, you know what your role in the team is and what your team's role purpose is in the squad, etc. And in an undergraduate setting, when you're in a lecture class, that's missing a lot of the times, but it's not missing from academia completely. This is a picture in the middle of me and my graduate advisor, Dr. Matthew Salenga, here in the biology department. And he did a phenomenal job when I joined his lab, because he put me in a team and he told me this team's purpose is to study depleted uranium and how it affects living systems and how it affects cells in a living system. And that was important. That stood out to me as being very important, because depleted uranium is a toxin that many service members are exposed to during their time in the military, as well as just a couple 100 miles away from us, our neighbors in the Northeast in the Navajo Nation, are that land is completely littered with abandoned uranium mines, which are leaking uranium into their environment due to unethical mining procedures. And so you have two very important populations that are being unfairly exposed to uranium. And so understanding, well, what are we seeing there? And so I wanted to include this little picture on the right. Well, okay, what is this uranium doing? We know it can harm people. How is it harming them? We need to understand that so we can help them. So here's a little picture of this is uranium, and this wall here, that's a edge of a single cell, and these are mitochondria in the cell. And if you're not used to looking at them, it might be hard to tell. These are sick mitochondria. They do not look the way that they're supposed to. And so you can look at this and say, oh, well, the uranium is causing these mitochondria to be sick. And why does that matter? Well, the mitochondria are the metabolism for the cell. They're the energy, and metabolic disorder can lead to so many different diseases, including cancer. And so I'm getting off on a little tangent here, but that was also part of the plan, because I hope, at least with my tangent, I made you a little curious about it. And this is something you didn't come to this talk to learn about, but I hope it made you curious because I presented the information with a goal first and then what came after that. So we could put what we were learning into a context. And so that context-based learning is something that everybody in, at least everybody I've talked to in higher education understands is immensely important. And so in this specific application is called goal-oriented learning. And this is what the military does all the time whenever you're learning there. I put up a little example here of what's called a danger area crossing. A danger area crossing is when you have a group of folks who are going to have to cross an open area that doesn't have any cover, and you suspect there may be enemies nearby. So you devise a specific way to cross that open area to reduce the chance of incurring any casualties. Now, when you start teaching newer troops, newer Marines, this technique, you start by telling them, hey, you are not safe while you're crossing. There is a chance that you're not safe while you're crossing this open area. So this is how we're going to cross the open area to keep you safe. Now they have this mission-oriented goal in mind to put all of the information during the learning into. And we can do this in the classroom. And so this is something that can be difficult at times, like if you're a chemistry teacher and you're teaching your students the Grignard reaction, why are the students learning the Grignard reaction? Is it because it's part of the requirements that the American Chemistry Society puts down to the chemistry departments at universities? But why did they do it, right? So what is the reason for doing it? If you're teaching biology, why does the student want to care? Why should the student care that the membrane of a cell is made of phospholipids? What does that matter? As teachers, it's our role to give them that helpful context and make their learning more successful for them. And so that's one way to do it. Now, I mentioned that being part of this purpose also helps with your feeling of satisfaction and that you feel like you're contributing to something, which leads us into our next challenge, the sense of self that these students might have a hard time with. So purpose and fulfilling a purpose or a goal is one of the crucial elements to feeling satisfied and being able to identify yourself. I put up on the right here a quote that a student actually asked me last semester. This student came into class, and before class started, they showed up early. They were being respectful and everything. And they asked me, do you ever feel like being a veteran is becoming less of your identity? And I responded to the student initially saying, it is 9 o'clock in the morning and I have not had enough coffee for this. And so we did eventually have a conversation, but it was a doozy of a question that I was in no way prepared to answer. And this is just a small snippet of a highlight of how some of these students might be struggling with reconciling who are they now that they're not in the military. And so what I wanted to show you here is sort of an anecdotal observation that I've gathered over about a decade of working with students in higher education, where this is typically how students perceive themselves as they come out of the military. They think of a big part of their identity, the majority of their identity, being that they were in the military, that they were a service member, that they contributed to something bigger than they are. Right. The two most common aspects that students highlight outside of being a service member exclusively is that they are part of a family. They love their family more than anything, and they want to provide for their family. And again, this is tying back to showing that the student veterans are just like any other student or any other person. Their needs are very real and very unique, but also relatable. Additionally, there is a challenge where they might have had a leadership role in the military. If they were, usually by the time you're getting out after your 4 years minimum, you're a leader of a small team. If you've been in longer, you're usually a leader of a large group of folks. You have a lot of responsibility, and there's a degree of pride that comes with that. And then now you take that leadership away, and you put them in an environment where they are in, as I've been, I'm paraphrasing what folks have told me, they basically have to sit down and shut up and listen. And so now they feel like they've lost their value because they're not being engaged and incorporated into the learning experience. Rather, the learning experience is just being pushed onto them. A couple of other things that I wanted to hit on, just because they are the most common things that are reported by student veterans, are their physical fitness. It means a lot to them that they are able to run 2 to 3 miles in 13 to 18 minutes, or swim a certain distance in 15 minutes, depending on what branch you are in. That means a lot to them because it's an achievement, and it's a degree of excellence that they can take pride in. But when you come to the university, you are pulled in so many directions. Your physical fitness is often one of the first things you have to make a sacrifice for, because you're not going to make a sacrifice to your family, right? And then lastly is their hobby. A lot of times they come and they tell me, you know, those examples that we saw on that diversity wheel from the first challenge, those often make up a big part of who they are as well. And so these are what anecdotally the students are saying is important to them, or the elements of their identity. But what actually are elements of identity? Well, Cheek and Briggs are sort of they laid the foundation for self-identification psychology and consciousness, and they published a paper showing that there are basically 6 elements that really are the core of most people's identity. And in no particular order, those are emotions, goals, right? Tying back into that purpose idea, intellect, how intelligent they feel they are, their ability to be creative, imagination, their ability to endure a lot or be resilient, and then their ideas, the things that they believe in. These are the 6 things that are known to be core elements of your personal identity. And how does being a service member tie into that? Well, at a minimum, being a service member covers your ideas, a sense of goals or purpose, and resilience, right? Being in the military, you are dedicating yourself to your country, right? You're committing a large chunk of your life to the United States, and if you live here. And so that example of wanting to aspire to be what you think is a good person satisfies that idea of what you believe is a good person. And so you're satisfying that. It gives you a sense of purpose. You are given missions, and you are working towards those missions, those goals, and achieving them regularly. And that satisfies that self-identification aspect of goals and purpose. Additionally, I have not met a single service member, regardless of what branch or what job they had in the military, that at some point did not demonstrate resilience, that at some point did not have to go to work the next day after working 3 days straight without any sleep, right? Those are very common examples where it shows that these individuals are pushing themselves to beyond their limits to be able to achieve their mission. Again, satisfying that resilience just by being a service member. But you can extrapolate and very easily find correlations to how being a service member meets all of these metrics of self-identification. You could imagine that for imagination, if you are in a context where you've never been trained for it before, right? What if you've only been trained for crossing roads as a danger area, and now you're coming up to a river as a danger area? Now you have to use your imagination and be creative to come up with a solution to still fulfill your purpose and achieve your mission that now is satisfying this imagination aspect of self-identification. Intelligence, if you could imagine if you used to work on a nuclear submarine and you were responsible for keeping that nuclear engine running, and then now you're coming to the university where you feel like, oh, you're telling me that molecules are made of atoms. Well, that student already knows that. It might feel like they've taken a step down in their intellectual journey, which can feel like they're pulling away from their self-identification. And then for emotions, one of the most common aspects in the military is being told to keep your bearing. In other words, control your emotions, regulate your emotions. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean to ignore your emotions or not deal or pretend they don't exist. It means if you're angry, that's okay to be angry, but use it in a productive way. Don't lose control. Don't let the emotion control you. So it's really getting another sense of attunement with your emotions, satisfying this full spectrum of personal personal self-identification. But what does that mean when you come and you are a student now, when you've had this very fulfilled and satisfied aspect of yourself? Well, being a student can fulfill all of these aspects as well, but the way in which it does is very different than the way that it was in military service. And working through that shift of self-identification can be more challenging for some than for others, especially when your goal, your purpose went from protecting your country to getting a degree. Protecting your country is something that can feel very primal, something that stirs something in you. Getting a degree is such an abstract goal that it is not, it can feel very distant and like it's not really meaningful, even though it is. And so just understanding while you're working with students, if they seem like they're struggling with some of these things, it's for a good reason. And then how can we help them? And that is sort of tying into this idea of knowing that there are resources here on campus, whether it be mental health or just getting them involved with somebody that gives them a sense of purpose. And that sort of brings us to this the next challenge that a lot of students face, which is making social connections, right? So social connections can be very empowering. They can give you a sense that if you're socially connected with a group, it can give you a sense of purpose that you didn't have before. And so another challenging aspect of that is that sorry. Uh, Another challenging aspect of that can be that in the military, you know very clearly how you're supposed to interact with others in a social setting, right? And that can be very different in the civilian side. So if in the, sorry, in the civilian side, or in the military side, sorry, I'm distracted. Carlos, do you have the ability to mute the person who unmuted their mic there? Oh, okay, thank you. All right, appreciate it. So in the military, if you come across somebody, you can look at them and you can see, okay, this person is this rank. I know how I'm supposed to interact with them. I'm supposed to give them the greeting of the day if they're a higher rank than me and address them by their rank, or if they're an officer, I address them as sir or ma'am and give them a salute. You have very well-defined rules and expectations for how to interact in that social setting. In the civilian side, it can be very different, right? You might approach somebody and they might be a peer, they might be a leader, they might be your professor. and you go to shake their hand and they go in for a fist bump, resulting in an awkward scenario where you probably feel more embarrassed than they do because you feel like this isn't what's supposed to happen. And so this is that's what this silly picture here is representing, right? But that's only one of the challenges that a student veteran might face. I wanted to show that there are some very stark interactions between individuals, or impressions of individuals, that goes both ways, that can make it challenging. So being in the military, you can experience very, very intense real world, sometimes some of the worst sides of what it means to be a human. You are experiencing that in real life. And that can lead to very rapid maturation, right? Where you feel like you are way older than other folks your age who aren't going through this kind of experience. When you put that into the setting where your peers are now freshmen right out of high school, so typically around 18 years old, it might be a 4-year gap in age at a minimum if they did a 4-year contract and got out, or maybe even a 20-year gap. But either of them can feel like a multi-generational gap, where it feels like that's just not those aren't the same kind of people as me. And there are a lot of similarities between the two populations. That is true, but it doesn't feel like that at the time. In this little cartoon on the right, I put up a couple of things that at the top, I put a couple of things my students have told me they feel about their civilian peers. The two most common being, everyone seems so young. They don't seem to have that drive that adults do, that sense of responsibility or accountability. Another aspect is there's a degree where they notice that their behavior seems rude to their teacher or their professor. And in the military, that behavior is absolutely unacceptable. And so it's off-putting for the veteran, because this is the person leading and they're being disrespected by this structural subordinate there, by what the structure shows them as their subordinates. And we know that that's not the true relationship in a classroom, but for the student veteran, that's the relationship that they're comparing this to. In this little snippet at the bottom, in this bubble at the bottom, I put a couple of things that civilian peers have said or asked me. And I want to preface this with, I don't think once were any civilian peers intentionally being insensitive when they say these kinds of things. And I also want to say that the reason I've included just things that have been said to me and not things that my students have said to me is because sometimes these things can be really hurtful. And so these are on the more mild side of things that can be said. One example is, I remember a civilian peer said, "Oh my God, you're a veteran. I've never met one of you before." And it's like, and I remember thinking, am I a museum piece? What do you mean you've never met one of me before? I'm a person just like you, you know? And so I know that from the civilian peers standpoint, it wasn't them trying to highlight me as an oddball or a weirdo or anything. It was really them trying to be respectful and recognize that there aren't a lot of people that serve. And that intent is admirable and I appreciated it, but that's not how it came across. Another one that civilian peers ask veterans, this is the one that I hear a lot from other veterans as well, is, did you kill anyone or did you hurt anyone? And this is something that is, I don't believe in any of the times that I have been asked this, was it with the intent to make me feel uncomfortable, but that's what it does, right? I think the intent for asking these questions is really trying to understand and connect with the veteran peer on a very deep level, but sometimes they're not ready for that. And so Just a word of advice, never ask for anybody who's not aware of this already, never ask a veteran a question like that. It really is off-putting and can put them in a really rough place mentally. Okay, moving forward. So civilians may be accidentally insensitive with their student veteran peers. So what can we do as leaders at the university? What can we do as professors, as directors of departments, etc.? We can encourage them to engage with other individuals in groups that have like-minded interests. So at least they are getting a socialization factor. So it has been well documented that the more engaged students are with their campus, the more likely they are to succeed and finish and complete their degree. And so faculty, there was a study by Dean, Sorgen, and Zinsky that showed faculty can be account for up to 23% of that success. So while you're only one person interacting with, if you're in a giant lecture, 240 students, you make a very big impact on those outcomes. And so what are some ideas? You can encourage them to get involved with clubs, or you can facilitate teamwork in class. And I have suggestions, a couple of suggestions that my students have told me works for them, that if you're curious. But another thing is you can ask them, okay, what do you like to do? You know, well, if they're struggling making social connections and they say that they want to connect with other veterans, they haven't found any. There's the Veteran Success Center on campus, which basically is a hub for student veterans to go and hang out and get questions answered about the university, etc. But there's also a club, the Student Veterans of America, which is a national club, but they have an NAU chapter. And the other spokes of this wheel that I've included are other examples of clubs that I have personally known student veterans to join because it appealed to something they wanted to do. And so just out of the sake of interest of time, I'll keep moving forward, and I'll wrap us up here with just a quick summary, right? So again, reiterating, the majority of these common challenges faced by student veterans are not exclusive to the veteran population, right? But they're more common in that population because they have a shared experience. There are other groups that face challenges similar. But every student, as you're thinking of these things that are the most common and why they are challenges, just remember that every student veteran is still a unique person, and that warrants unique solutions for their challenges. So assumed homogeneity, student veterans share similarities, but they're still unique, and that might require unique solutions. They might be losing touch with a sense of purpose, and that in the military, their purpose was told to them. It's not in the setting of a university. Their purpose is as unique as they make it, and that might be distressing. And so goal-oriented learning teaching styles can provide a small sense of purpose in the moment and make the learning more enriched. Furthermore, understanding that the structure of the university is drastically different than the military, we can help bridge that or ease that transition by at least being willing to serve as a liaison to appropriate resources if a student approaches you with any challenges. Sense of self, this is one of those things that is not exclusive to military. Another population that is faces this very frequently are student athletes after they retire from being an athlete. Being an athlete was a very integral part of their identity, right? So there are correlations that can be drawn across those two populations and showing that these challenges aren't exclusive to veterans, but it's still, regardless of which population they're coming from, needs unique solutions. And then finally, making social connections. Being integrated into campus leads to higher success rates. It's been documented over and over and over again, and we can facilitate that by putting teamwork into our classrooms or by referring them to social settings that they enjoy. With that, I apologize for only leaving us a few minutes for questions, but I did want to open up the floor to any questions if anybody has them. And I see that there, oh, yeah, so I see that there is one question already in the chat. Suji, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong.
That's okay. It's pronounced Suhei.
Suhei. Well, thank you, Suhei. I really appreciate you bringing that up because that you're very right. These are very similar challenges for first gen students. I'm also a first gen student, and I remembered as I was coming up in undergrad, there were a lot of similarities that as I met other first gen students, they would tell me about the struggles they're facing. And I was like, wow, I thought I was facing that struggle because I came from the military, but there is a lot of overlap. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Suhei. 100. Are there any other questions from anybody? All righty. Well, I hope this was helpful. I hope it was as entertaining as it was informative, and at least help to build a better understanding of the position that a lot of the student veterans come from. If you ever have any questions about any of this stuff, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is ronald.allen@nau.edu. I'm happy to talk about it more. So thank you all, and thank you for spending the last part of the conference with me. And thanks for all the support that you're giving to our student veteran population.